Welcome to Real Estate Investors' third consecutive weekly pre-summit webinar, series of 4 webinars hosted every Thursday. So the digitalization of Real Estate Summit is brought to you by Real Estate Investor in conjunction with our title sponsors, International Workplace Group, who are also on our panel today. You probably know the brands such as Regis Spaces, Number 18, Base Point, Open Office, and Signature under their umbrella. So IWG creates personal, financial, and strategic value for businesses of every size, from some of the most well-known organizations on the planet to individuals and the next generation of industry leaders. All of them harness the power of flexible working to increase your productivity, efficiency, agility, and market proximity. So moving on to our main topic for today, the future of the office. Hasn't it changed dramatically? And it's been thrown into disarray caused by this pandemic. And in fact, the fast forward button has been pushed to adapt or die. Work from home has become the new norm or the new trend, while many offices still stand empty. And many companies are cutting back on office space, and commercial real estate landlords have been pushed. They've had to start innovating and pivoting. So what will the new workplace model be going forward? Technology and PropTech innovations are already changing human behavior and has driven change by reducing and changing the way the office is set up. Companies and employers are able to do more with less space. No more filing cabinets, even large server rooms required. They've been replaced by cloud. The playbook in the world of work has changed, and so has the co-working space. It was John Chambers, former executive and chairman of CEO of Cisco Systems, said the following: at least 40% of all businesses will die in the next 10 years. If they don't figure out how to change their entire company to accommodate new technologies. So without further ado, let's introduce you to our 2 panelists today. Our first panelist, he has spent 22 years developing franchise brands, specifically in the food and beverage sector abroad. More recently, he's been an integral part of the IWG group, who has been running successful workspaces for over 30 years. His role is to drive the next phase of growth for office spaces through franchising and seek sound franchise partners to grow co-working office spaces network in South Africa. IWG already have 57 franchises in 17 South African cities and towns. He's the head of partnership growth for IWG, better known as Regis Spaces, HQ and Signature and co-working spaces. And they're also the title sponsors of the 2021 Digitalization of Real Estate Summit, taking place on Thursday, the 19th of August. So you also have an opportunity to meet, hear, and engage with them at the summit as well. Alan, welcome to you. As usual, it's great having you on the show.
Thank you, Neil. It's always good to be involved again and to be able to share our insights on this rapidly evolving topic, and quite an exciting one too.
Absolutely. All right, our next guest, he has over 35 years experience in the built environment. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in building surveying. He became a chartered building surveyor with the RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, in 1987. He started his own project management and building surveying company in the UK and South Africa. He is a member of the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management. He's an immediate past chairman of the South African Facilities Management Association. He now runs Workplace Fundi. It's an independent workplace and facilities management consultancy focused on helping executive navigating the world of work and transforming the existing workplace into a high impact environment that increases human performance and cuts costs. His name is Andrew Mason. He's the founder of Workplace Fundi. Andrew, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing your insights with you today.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Alan. Thanks for sharing, giving me the opportunity to share.
But great having you on the show, Andrew. So let's get into the Q&A. Let's get into the heart of the discussion. I think there's so much, and it's so relevant and so broad because it impacts so many people in so many different ways, and that's in the workplace. So Alan, I'm going to fire away with you first. I mean, it really wasn't likely that anybody could have predicted the real estate market shift, particularly in the office sector in the past 18 months. And I mean, we know the pandemic has played a leading role in those shifts. And as in many other industries, it's possible that the landscape and even the playbook of the office sector has forever changed. So from your perspective, Alan, what changes have you seen in the office sector? And in particular, what impact have you seen in the flexible working space in the last 18 months?
Neil, thanks for that. Flexible co-working was a concept that's been, as you mentioned in your introduction, has developed over the last 30 years. We did sort of pioneer it, and we've been growing our brands over the years. But what we have noticed is that when we went into 2020, all of a sudden, companies that probably didn't have a remote working strategy, or they might have been thinking about one but not really activating it, suddenly were forced to deal with a workforce that had to work from home or work remotely. And so as much as a global pandemic didn't really start, didn't initiate flexible co-working, it was certainly a catalyst in the growth of flexible co-working. We've noticed that over the last 18 months that a lot of companies have started to adopt a more sort of hybrid work model, which allows people to work partly from an office, partly from not necessarily from home, because I think that acronym has changed. It's not work from home, it's more sort of work near home or work from anywhere. And the idea really with flexible co-working is to create an environment where people can work in a professional environment, but it's a lot closer to where they live, or maybe closer to schools. It lessens the commute time, and also gives people a client-facing office environment where they can use a meeting room, they can access printing and scanning facilities. So the idea really, from our perspective, we've seen a massive growth in the demand for flexible co-working. And I'm sure we'll get onto it a little bit later when we start talking about sort of the landlord's perspective and big occupiers. But the demand is certainly has been accelerated by COVID. We've seen a lot more people wanting flexibility, and a lot more or corporates looking for a flexible solution for their workforce.
Okay, excellent. I think it's a good way just to set the scene over there, Alan. Yeah, so it's a dynamic place where we are right now. So Andrew, you work with quite a broad base of clients in the workplace sort of environment. How have you seen the pandemic impacting the workplace environment? And are you seeing corporations streamlining and cutting back on their office space? What has your experience been?
I think in the initial stages, I think the CFOs were definitely having dollar signs in their eyes, thinking they could reduce the size of their real estate by sending everybody home and then working from home. And I think the longer it's gone on, the more we realize that probably is a very extreme view. I think there are certainly opportunities out there, but the issue around the workplace, we're bombarded with data from the US and the UK, and they are very much further on the vaccination curve than we are. And I think so it's a bit of a wait and see scenario. The executives and CEOs and C-suite that I talk to know that it's around, but haven't yet made the decisions that are probably necessary. So wait and see. And I do think, we historically have been behind those two markets, the Americentric and the Eurocentric market. But I think now is the time where we can learn from potentially their mistakes. But, I think we need to be very careful of importing data from those shores and directly correlating it to the South African market, because I think it's very different. Our economic, socio-economic situation is very much different. Our infrastructure challenges are very much different. the whole workforce is very different. So I think we can learn, certainly, but I think we need to basically take some time, but see where we go and how we put that into a South African perspective. I think it'd be very dangerous to just look at seeing what's happening elsewhere and thinking that's the way we're going to be able to do it.
So what do you see the future workplace looking like, Andrew? I mean, and has the role of prop tech and digital platforms played a role to the evolution of the office, specifically, I think, just from lockdown onwards? I mean, what have you seen?
So, I mean, I think it will, definitely. It'll become very much more mainstream. I think you're finding there is a little bit of separation. You know, the big financial services industries were probably on this charge 5 to 10 years ago, some of them. But I think, you know, what is the future going to look like? I don't have a crystal ball. And I think, you know, I had a client say to me recently, you know, if you're certain about the changing world of work, you're almost certainly wrong. It becomes a bit like a horoscope. You know, I think people are seeing what is going to happen or are making binary decisions or binary choices. And like so many things in the world, people are setting themselves up on those. But I certainly can't tell you what the future of workplace is. But I think what I can tell you is that it is not going to be the same for every organization. It's going to be different. I mean, I've been on record as saying it's a one-size-fits-one approach. But I do think that organizations, from what I'm hearing, I'm actually running a poll on LinkedIn at the moment. So if anybody on the thing wants to go and listen, just click on one of the options there. I'm seeing that organizations are risking sleepwalking into the future because they're not talking to their staff. I mean, the balance of power has changed, I believe, from this sort of command and control management type culture. And it is now that balance of power, I think, is in the hands of the employees. And unless the management and executives go and talk to their employees and understand what their experience is at home, what their experience is in the workplace, what work activities are suitable to the home or working from anywhere, and what are the work activities that need to take place in the workplace, they are going to fall short. And with that balance of power shifting, if they go back to this idea of compelling people back to the workplace, let's say when we have achieved some sort of vaccination level, I think they're going to come up short. I think people have been trusted to work from home and have relatively been successful working from home in different spheres. To command them back to the workplace is not going to wash, I don't think. And I think you're going to find a very big issue potentially happening unless they do a sort of deep dive into the activities that support people in various locations. I mean, what I've said is that organizations need to provide a compelling reason to come back to the workplace, not to compel people to come back to the workplace.
Okay, so Alan, from your perspective, is the old office model with the long-term lease dead? And I mean, and just cottoning on to what Andrew was saying, certainly is that there seems to be, and he said there's definitely a shift from providing just the physical space to help providing tenants with the multi-channel work experience. And maybe you can say, what are you doing at IWG that's maybe trying to cater for that particular sector? Are you seeing that? Are you seeing the needs change, or is it something, is it an environment that is kind of providing all those things already?
No, Neil, I don't believe that the office space, and certainly not commercial office space, is dead by any means. You know, I think we've had a forced shift where people have had to work elsewhere or work remotely. And I think to Andrew's point, you know, it's how quickly will big business transition to getting people back into the office, or will they even transition entirely back to the way they used to work and potentially adopt a more sort of hybrid work model? But in answer to your question, we certainly see a trend, and we see a change in habits of people going into the office. And there are a couple of industry experts that like to try and predict based on the way that the trend has been moving. And if to quote JLL, they anticipate that by the year 2030, that 30% of corporate real estate will be flexible. So, for us, that obviously talks to our models, and I think it talks to the trend that a lot of the workforce, again to Andrew's point, a lot of the workforce are dictating to the employers. A lot of them prefer to work from home, although they might not have been able to initially. They were a little bit uncertain or unsure of it, but there's evidence to show that and multiple surveys to show that the workforce are enjoying working from at least remotely some days of the week, maybe not all of the time. But at the same time, what it does do is it opens up the opportunity to, certainly for landlords, to relook at their proposition. And they're not just selling square meters anymore. They're selling space as a service. And what can you bolt onto that proposition now? So are you going to be able to allow people a little bit more flexibility? Are you going to be able to have auxiliary services in addition to that space that will promote a more conducive sort of work environment? And I think the work from home culture, it may never die. There will be a percentage of people that do enjoy it, but the reality is we are faced with lots of inhibitors or when it comes to working from home, and probably the biggest of which is consistent power supply. If you don't have power, you're not going to have Wi-Fi connection, and if you don't have Wi-Fi connection, you find it difficult to connect with people. So, and I can speak from personal experience. I find working at my dining room chair particularly uncomfortable. So, I like to be able to...
You're not sitting there now, are you, Alan?
No, I'm working from one of our flexible co-working centers.
Okay, good.
The truth is, you want to be able to access the office environment, but potentially you want to be able to not have to commute as far. Andrew spoke about the hub and spoke model, and that's certainly coming into play. People will go into the head office or the HQ maybe once every now and then, and not every day.
So has the needs changed for the occupiers, for the tenants of IWG since hard lockdown? Has there been any particular shift or movement towards a particular need towards those tenants within flexible spaces?
Not so much in terms of the need. I think flexibility has always been one of the things. Being able to scale up and scale down quickly has been a big thing, particularly for the corporates that are paying the bill. But the need has changed in the conventional lease occupiers, certainly.
Right. Okay.
The CFOs are re-looking at their expenses. They're looking at their lease costs. They're looking at the space they occupy and saying, do we actually need as much space as we have occupied previously? And can our workforce work more remotely, and as a result, the need for the space be less?
That flexibility of space. No, that's excellent. I think that's such a good point that you've made there. Andrew, going to bring you in here just on the whole working from home concept. And I mean, Alan has kind of, described it partly, and I know you kind of give a lot of advice in this area. I mean, how can you stay effective no matter where you are located? I mean, this is regardless of kids barking, dogs, pets and other distractions. And, how can we operate productively and set up a home office that works for you? Because you still need to have that environment that does work for you, whether you're working hybrid in an IWG flexible office or in a traditional office space or whatever. How can you do that? How can you set yourself up?
Well, I think, it really depends on what it is that you do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, what are your work activities that require the infrastructure around you? I mean, if you're doing 130 emails a day, or you're working on your laptop pretty much on your own, then
some people don't call
you,
that work, Andrew.
well, yes, yeah, unfortunately. Well, I mean, I think that's a really good point, because I think, you know, in the early days where you were finding people were doing that and they're saying, no, I'm really, really productive. Well, you know, there's people that will beg to differ that if you're doing 120 emails a day, are you really producing anything? So there is obviously another discussion around that. But the fact of the matter is that you can do that from home. But do you have a home office? Do you have an office where you can shut the door so you don't hear the dogs barking? Or I mean, I have my gardener outside at the moment. I've actually had to tell him not to mow the lawn outside my room because I'm on this. So those are the type of things. I mean, even there was a discussion on 702 yesterday about the ladies who are doing the news. They're reading it from their home, but she's got a screaming baby in the background, and that's being broadcast to probably 2 million people in Gauteng. So I think we're all getting used to that now. But what does productivity mean? I think the issue is individually we have a fairly good idea if we are productive. But if you are perhaps a younger member in a corporate, do you really know whether you're being productive? Do you know what you're working on? You'll probably have a smaller sphere or spectrum of work that you have to do. Whereas if you're an executive, you probably have, you know, a much wider need, and that's where sort of activity-based working came from. So I think it really does depend what your home location is, and as we know, as I pointed out earlier on, the socioeconomic problems that we have in this country. You've got young, particularly potentially Black workers living in township situations that may not have the infrastructure around them that they can work. And these guys have got good corporate paying jobs potentially in the CBD, and they'll rush back to the office as soon as they can. Whereas perhaps the executives who are living in, you know, very privileged white suburbs probably don't want to go back to the office, but they're probably the people that need to go back to the office the most. So it really is, as I said earlier on, a one size fits one approach, and it has to be dealt with from a data-led basis. And I think we need to understand that, you know, we have to look at the data. The data is what is going to decide whether we make those decisions based on bias or whether we're going to base it on fact. And I think that's the issue. And I really do think that, you know, corporate real estate is a product-based industry that was probably you know, on its last, well, not its last legs, but it was dying a slow death, or certainly the long lease was dying a slow death. It is a product-based industry, and they're now faced with customers that want services and they want a workplace experience, and that's why we've seen the rise of co-working locations even before COVID, because this whole idea of, you know, real estate or space as a service is now there. We are following 10 years behind the retail experience, and we're now trying to provide a workplace experience.
Yeah, so it's almost a matter of, you know, people still want to reach out to people in that you know, working space as well. But I think you made such an important point about data, and you analyzing that data. In fact, we've got a whole section at our summit on data and analytics. We've got a whole lot of experts that play in both the rental space, in commercial and residential, and you know, what data can do. And I think that's critical, because that's going to give you the measure of what's going forward. So Alan, over to you. We've seen semigration. It's growing as a global trend. I mean, we've seen individuals, families move locally in search for a more balanced lifestyle. But so what are you seeing in that space, and why people are shifting? I mean, obviously lifestyle is one, as I've mentioned, but where do you see that going? And I think that would be a benefit for you, because you operate in smaller towns, and there's opportunities, I think, for you to operate in those areas, I'm sure.
Neil, the answer is quite simple. I think the trend is being spurred by digitization and people being able to work remotely. We talk about semigration as sort of that whole Zoom boom. And it's really it's based on the fact that people can work remotely, and when they realize that remote means work from anywhere, it doesn't mean that they have to work from home. It fuels that semigration trend where people can work from a coastal town that might lend itself to a better work environment, better work-life balance, better surroundings, and they no longer have to be in the main metro. And that has then subsequently driven our strategy in terms of where we want to grow to. You mentioned earlier we have 57 centers around South Africa. We have 3,500 centers around the world. But the growth is going to be driven into those suburban locations and the sort of the secondary towns and cities in South Africa, where we can see the demand is much bigger than in the metros. And to support that, we had a webinar, one of your webinars earlier this year, where we had some of the estate agents on, and they spoke about the same estate agents, the likes of Seif, Pam Golding, Grief, all operating in globally, or not globally, operating right throughout South Africa. But their demand for property, residential property in the Zoom towns, so the Georges and Hermanus and the coastal towns around South Africa, is up 35% plus year on year, whereas the demand for property in the main metros is down year on year. So we've certainly seen the demand for flexible co-working in those spaces, and our strategy is really to try and service that demand and get a presence in those towns, so that people can access a professional work environment and be able to work effectively from there. And when they need to, they can travel into the HQ or the main metro on occasion, and still be part of the corporate culture, and still be able to access and collaborate with their people, but still work effectively remotely.
Okay, great. So I think, people in this pandemic have, they're missing this human contact. They kind of want to get together. So Andrew, I think just, how's it going to be after social distancing is over? I mean, this Zoom fatigue has started to kick in. We've seen it certainly in our numbers, and that's exactly why we're not having the Digitalization Summit on Zoom, because we've given people the opportunity where they can talk to each other as if they, and they can reach out to them, can have a private meeting, but talk. So we don't have to text each other. So how do you think that, where is it all going? Where's the shift going? Is it going to remote conversations, face-to-face meetings again, or is it going to both? I mean, what do you see?
Well, what I see at the moment is three stale, pale males. And I know that if you've got teenage kids like I've got, I started late in life, they don't like face-to-face conversations anyway. They're doing this as naturally. That is their natural go-to form of communication. So I think you could ask the question whether social distancing is ever going to be over. And I don't suppose, I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't know whether we're ever going to get back to it. But I think you're going to be in a situation where we are going to have to be a partly remote and partly face-to-face. I think, our generation probably does miss the pressing the flesh when we go into meetings. But certainly that generation that's coming into the workplace now doesn't. And doesn't see that as necessarily a prerequisite. So I think the psychosis that we live with from social distancing is going to remain with us for a long time. I think, somebody said in the very early days, the health and safety issue, whatever is healthy is no longer safe, and whatever's safe is no longer healthy. And I think that's going to be with us for a while. So I don't honestly know, and I'm my opening comment was nobody really knows, and so I want to resist the temptation to make speculation. But I do think we're in a situation where life has changed, and those that are picking up the reins as becoming the sort of center of gravity of the workforce is going to communicate differently. One other thing I would like, I know this is obviously a real estate based conversation, but I think we need to recognize the fact that the workforce is going to change and how people are contracted as well. You're seeing it in the rest of the world now, where corporations, in order to reduce risk, are going to temporary workers, gig workers, freelancers, contractors, whatever it might be. Now, obviously, we have a labor law in this country, and it's often, we often complain that it is too restrictive. But the fact of the matter is that corporations, you're not going to be in a situation where you have a fully employed workforce from here on in, because they are going to need to upscale and downsize as and when the economy finds its need to do so. And I think that's not only going to affect the workplace, it's going to affect the workforce as well. And I think with that, you're going to get a workforce that potentially has an employee reporting to a gig worker who reports to a contractor who may report to a freelancer. And that in itself brings a whole new dynamic into the workplace and the workforce. So yeah, I think that's the situation that we would probably get to. And I think the whole mental well-being, mental health things, we're seeing it now coming out of Europe. As I said earlier on, there's a big focus from that side as to how this lack of cohesion, isolation is affecting us from a mental health perspective. And I think that's probably the next tsunami that's coming our way.
Yeah, no, good point. And I think, just coming back to your point about, using technology, the new millennials, the most important person in the room is the iPhone or the Android phone. So, and I think it's always been...
When I was asked the other day what my wife looked like, I said, it looks like the back of an iPhone.
Oh, wow. So we're losing our connection with people. But first of all, coming back to you, Alan, just coming back onto the topic of real estate, and how do you see the big cities adapting to life after the pandemic? And Andrew, I'd like your comments. Maybe you can add on to that. Or will they? Because, if you look at the big cities, you look at Sandton, it's almost sort of, it used to be a hub of activity, and it's turned into almost a ghost town. So what, how are they going to start adapting after the pandemic? And we're seeing less similar things happening in the Cape Town CBD and what have you. But how do you see them adapting to life after, this whole thing is over, we hope?
It's a tough one to try and predict, Neil, but I can tell you now, if you look at the current vacancy rates in those metro areas, particularly Sandton, it's a great example, because we saw this massive boom of commercial office space and big high-rise buildings going up, and there's these big firms. You've got auditing firms and legal firms, splashing their branding all over the buildings. But the reality is that it's a great billboard, but inside they probably have a 40% vacancy. So I definitely see that unless landlords rethink their proposition or rethink the conventional lease offering, they're going to suffer with lots of vacancies and underutilized space for a long time. So that's the one factor. The other factor is commute times. If you don't need to waste time commuting, then why do it? If you can commute less, commute closer to home, then I think that's going to play a significant role in people's decisions on where they work and how they work. And that really is the premise of sort of flexible co-working, is allowing people that opportunity to work where they want, when they want, and for as long as they want. So the big cities, there's certainly a cause for a rethink on the models, the traditional models and the traditional lease. And I think that there's going to be a slow clawback to get the numbers back into them. And as Andrew said earlier, it's the big corporates are going to have to motivate and have a compelling reason for their people to come back in, as opposed to forcing them to come back in. So, and you'll see it with a lot of them that are revisiting their leases now. They're saying, well, do we need all the space? Potentially what we can do is we can let go a lot of it, not renew leases, still have a head office in certain regional locations, but the smaller offices they may not need anymore, and potentially empower their workforce to either work from home or work from a remote or flexible work environment.
Andrew, do you want to add to that? Any comments, further comments?
Yeah. I think as I said earlier on, I think traditionally the corporate real estate industry was changing prior to COVID, because the process of producing a typical office is like no other production environment. It's a one-off prototype that hasn't necessarily been tested. They don't know who they're producing it for. And so I think it's one that is seriously out of touch with the reality we're facing. The occupier is the consumer of that space, and yet they're not even considered in the whole building process. I wrote a piece a couple of months back. There's that playground riddle. What am I when the person that makes me doesn't need me? The person who buys me doesn't use me, and the person that uses me doesn't want me. And obviously the answer to that is a coffin. And you can make of that what you like, but it's exactly the same as corporate real estate. The person, the developer that makes it doesn't need it. The person who buys it, the institution, doesn't use it. And the person that uses it, which is the occupier, actually doesn't want it. That's a grudge purchase for them. That what they want, they don't want those facilities. They don't want that office. They want a productive workforce. Now, what you've got in this whole COVID thing is that they are seeing this whole productive workforce, or a supposedly productive workforce, and they don't need the office space to go. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that, when you had, as Alan said, 500,000 squares of vacant space in Sandton prior to COVID hitting in the beginning of 2019, God knows what it is now. That long lease, they're sitting on it and not knowing what to do with it, because they can't get rid of it at the moment until their lease is up. So yeah, I do think this is all playing into the likes of Alan's company's hands, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It makes the whole agility and resilience much more achievable. How to upsize and downsize as you want to, and that's what big corporates want. I think the fact that you're not tied to a desk anymore has given them this freedom that says, I can now look at what we do. And I think the biggest challenge for organizations is to be able to have the management culture that allows their teams to work maybe all remotely, semi-remotely, some in, some out. And I think, from a South African management perspective, this reliance that we've had of herding people under one roof for since the Industrial Revolution, and being able to command and control is no longer a valid management style. It is going to have to be done by not even output, it's going to have to be done by outcome, and understanding that it's collaborative, and you are not, just because somebody is in the office, the whole presenteeism thing doesn't exist anymore, shouldn't exist. So I think that is one of the biggest curveballs that we're going to have to completely rethink our leadership and management of people.
And lots of curveballs. There's come the real estate way. Outside of a pandemic, the retail industry has taken a huge knock. And we don't want to go there. We had that discussion last week, Andrew, so I'm not going to actually ask you to comment on that one. So between office and retail, but we're getting closely to the bewitching hour, and we've got some questions that I'd like to set for you, Alan, and we also got a question for you, Andrew, and I encourage the audience to send some more. I don't know if we'll get through them all right now. And then, of course, I'll ask both of you just to give us a wrap up. So we've got a question here for Alan, and if we take COVID out of the equation, do you think that we would have seen this change in the office space anyway? Is it that this new way of working has changed expectations of the workforce, or is it the other way around? A new workforce generation who has changed what they expect from their jobs. And I think we kind of have covered that in some form or other, but I think maybe if you want to just add on to that, Alan?
Yeah, Neil, it's an interesting question. And I like whoever posed that question. I think it's a great way of thinking, because yes, the workforce is starting to dictate the work environment and how they work. A lot of it's driven by a generation, the millennial generation, that are a lot more sort of they're the early adopters and the ones that are more open to a new way of working and not necessarily looking to working in the typical structured environment where they have to be in at 8 and out at 5. In fact, a lot of that millennial generation would rather trade for a more flexible work environment than for other work benefits, that we traditionally would have had in a package. So yeah, I definitely think it's been driven by the workforce. It's also been it's driven by external circumstances, and I think just if you look at it globally, you need to look at how efficient that workforce is and what inhibits that efficiency. Certainly commuting, particularly in the big metros around the world. If you have to commute into New York or into London city central, it may have taken you a couple of hours a day in and out. And we've got a big drive at the moment with taking workspace into the suburban locations. Is kind of we call it the 15-minute commute, because that's generally what the workforce is demanding. They don't want to spend more than that commuting to a place of work. We'd like to be able to embrace those opportunities when people do demand a place to work closer to home. And that's part of our strategy. As I said, I see there's a couple of people that have come onto the call from a lot of those coastal towns that we spoke about. And
yes.
We're not there yet, but we're certainly looking at coming to those towns.
Okay, there's just another question sort of attached to that. I think it's related to your space. I'm going to get to you, Andrew. There's a question coming for you as well. And it's from Georgie. She says, I'm curious to find out from the panelists, which corporates in South Africa are you seeing showing real leadership and courage where this new way of working is concerned? And I think, Alan, you probably know firsthand for those that are knocking on your door, or those doors that you've knocked on. So maybe can you share with us?
Well, I can only share sort of from our experience who we have been engaging with, and but from a global point of view, I can give good examples. Probably the most significant was someone like Standard Chartered Bank, where they've been very progressive in adopting a sort of a hybrid work model. They put 95,000 employees onto a flexible co-working membership, and reduced their formal or their traditional lease footprint. The big telecommunications company NTT, 300,000 of their employees have joined our network recently to be able to work more remotely. And in the South African context, probably the most significant one is the banks, because the banks traditionally, they were already at pre-COVID. I think banking, retail banking had changed anyway. It wasn't that you have to go into the bank and produce a document and get it stamped. Now everything is being done online, it's digital. But more than that, they're starting to find that they don't need as many regional offices. They may still have the big corporate and the big head office in the main metros, but less and less are you finding the need for a traditional bank setup. So we're engaging with all of them, and certainly we'd like to be able to offer those corporates that are rethinking their model an opportunity to use a flexible workspace solution. I think those are the main ones that we've experienced.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you look at sort of Catherine and Ravonia, there's a lot of attorney firms. There's the Discovery Building. There's, most of them are empty. Andrew, what is your experience been in terms of who have you seen? Who are the corporates that have kind of, that you've seen, that perhaps Alan has not mentioned, that kind of is open or is flexible to moving into this new way of working?
No, I think actually Alan hit the nail on the head. I can't think of anybody else who, and certainly he's at the front line. The banking sector were probably on this path before COVID. Certainly, if you looked at some of the co-working spaces that opened up in central Johannesburg, I know that all the big banks, Standard Chartered, ABSA, Barclays, as was, they were all in the queue to talk to these guys. So certainly those financial services, along with the banks, the old mutuals, Discovery, I guess, is in the financial space. I know that they've obviously taken a big long lease on their building in One Discovery Place. They're probably in a situation where they've only got 10 to 15% of their people in there on a daily basis. But obviously they are a leader in terms of the real estate space. So I think it's all of those companies that probably have, in fairness, the technology dialed in prior to COVID, that they had a relatively flexible workforce, that they can do that. And I think the others, and where they have led, the others will follow.
Okay, great.
I mean, one of the things I do think is quite interesting around the flexible working space. I mean, I mentioned that the issues around workforce, but it's also interesting to me. I was on a call last week where a survey was done by Boston Consulting Group, and they're saying that, while 76% of people want flexibility in where they work, up to 96% want flexibility as into when they work. And that obviously, again, plays into this idea of having a 24/7, or maybe not a 24/7, but certainly a longer working day, when people can come and go as they please.
Well, I've got a great question that falls straight into the hands of that particular comment that you just made there, Andrew, which was up there. It says, our business is shifting towards asynchronous working. Our workforce is across the world and we work in different time zones. Do you have any tips on the best way to approach this new way of working, which could be working at midnight?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think those that have had a global platform have had to, whilst we've all got onto Zoom calls, whatever, even prior to COVID, again, with people in the UK, in Asia, etc., at various different times. Now the issue is that you've got those platforms behind the video platforms that allow you to become sort of managing by projects, I suppose, where you get given tasks on your Asana or whatever platform that you want to use. And that idea of asynchronous working, again, sort of talks to maybe the younger generation, where you don't need that FaceTime. You don't need to clock in at some ungodly hour in the morning or at nighttime. That talks to your work-life balance and says, you're in the middle of dinner where you want dinner with your kids, but no, I've got to go and attend a meeting. And I think that is, and certainly technology will allow us to do that. And I know that prop tech is one of those things that it's the buzzword at the moment, but that's going to affect not only our ability to work from home and communications, asynchronous working, but it's also going to be an absolute necessity in whatever that office or workplace or office looks like in future, in order to manage who's in, who's out, who's coming in, who's coming out. Do I know? Am I? This idea. I was on a platform with one of my ex-colleagues the other day, where it was a totally an offline office, but I could see who was in this office, and I could literally go and digitally tap them on the shoulder and have a conversation with them. And that is as close as I've got to having a sort of real, if you like, office experience, but sitting in my chair at home.
Well, let me tell you what, Andrew, at our digitalization event in 2 weeks, you can bump each other if you like, but you won't feel the bump, but you can nudge each other, you can speak out. So there's different ways of reaching out to anybody. You can follow somebody on this platform. You can meet privately anywhere in this platform. You can watch on demand at any time. So we look forward to having you there as our guest, and you'll see this fantastic new platform that we got in 2 weeks' time. Andrew will be there, ladies and gents, and Alan will also be there. I mean, Alan is our headline sponsor. And we're just heading towards the bewitching hour. So, gents, we are running out of time. I'm going to ask each of you to give your wrap up. And so maybe, Andrew, I'm going to start off with you, and then Alan, I'll give you the final word and the final say. And maybe just give your perspective. Leave somebody with something that they could take away in terms of the future of the office and the future of work and the workplace, and maybe give them something that they could walk away with?
So, I mean, my takeaway is consult your staff. I mean, as I said, I'm running a poll on LinkedIn. I'd love people just to click on it and go and tell me your thoughts. But it is about consulting your staff and an in-depth look, not just one of those sort of, oh, how's it working for you? Are you working better or not? Nothing as facile as that. You want a deep dive into how the home and how the office supports not just productivity, but your whole human performance, which takes into account your well-being, wellness, all of those type of things. And our HR colleagues on the call will be able to provide us that information. But it's not just a productivity is part of human performance. It's not the whole thing. So, and from that rich set of data, then base your decisions. And I had a conversation, actually, funny enough, with my wife, who works for an engineering company here in Pretoria. Saying, they're being called back to work. I said, why aren't they speaking to their staff? Do you want to come back to the office? Talk to your staff. That will build trust, build engagement, and take it from there. That's what I would say.
Wonderful. Nice way to end off, Andrew. And it's great having you on the show. Andrew Mason, he's the founder of Workplace Fundi. Thank you very much for joining us today. Don't disappear yet. And Alan, you got the final wrap up, the final say. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, from my side, Neil, I think that when we opened it, it was talking about the future of the office, and you made the comment about, is the office dead, and the conventional office, and the answer is no, definitely not. I do think that there will always be a place for it. I think that it's going through a rapid evolution, and the landlords have to adapt to that evolution, and they have to be able to evolve with the times. They have to change their proposition. As for the occupiers, I think that it's creating a massive opportunity. I think it affects the expense line in a lot of big companies, where you can reduce your expenses, and but you can still have a workforce that is as efficient or as effective. And what Andrew was saying earlier is that your way of measuring or managing that has to change as well. They would have to look at sort of more of an outcome-based or a project-based way of managing your staff, as opposed to the old clock in and clock out system. But I think that there will always be a place for the office. There will be a place for people to engage and still be able to have that contact. There will be a place for the meeting room, and there'll be and there's the need to be able to access those services. You need to be able to print still. You need to be able to have a receptionist that's going to be able to field the call. So I think that's really where we come in, and what we seek to sort of provide to that evolving office market. We hope to be in. We hope to grow our footprint as a result of that, to be able to be in every suburban location, in every smaller city and town, so that people don't have to commute long distances.
Fantastic. Alan van der Westhuizen, Head of Franchise Partnerships at IWG. Wonderful having you. And you're going to be back in 2 weeks' time. If you want to see Alan, come join us, please, at our Digitalization of Real Estate Summit. That brings us to the end of our third Digitalization pre-series webinar. And I'd like to thank both of our panelists today. It was fantastic discussion, very insightful. Don't miss our final Digitalization series part 4 next week, where we'll be meeting the investors of PropTech and technology. And the week after that, the big Digitalization of Real Estate Summit takes place on the 19th of August, the place to learn, share valuable knowledge, discover the latest PropTech. You can network, meet, engage with the leaders in real estate companies, founders, investors, innovators, and disruptors in the South African PropTech and FinTech environment. This is just not another real estate or PropTech event. This is an experience that could change your business and your life. Our content zones offer more than 8 hours of on-demand content at the summit that focus on 6 PropTech content areas: the shared economy, Internet of Things, FinTech, data and analytics, marketplaces, and digital innovations. The main digitalization summit's only 397 Rand per delegate for early bird bookings. Purchase tickets. There's a link below. Look at that now. We look forward to seeing you both at our at the digitalization event and also next Thursday. And I'm going to leave you with an inspirational quote from Charles Darwin, best known for his scientific theory of evolution. And he said, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change." Thank you, everybody. This is Neil Peterson of Real Estate Investors signing out. Stay safe and successful investor.